Hello, everyone. Welcome to another podcast. It's my first in about 2 or 3 weeks. You are very welcome to this Periscope, not podcast. My name is Craig Considine. I am currently living in Houston, Texas, where I'm a faculty member of the Department of Sociology at Rice University. And what I would like to talk about today is teaching Muslims in American society in the hotbed of Islamophobia. Muslims in American Society is the name of my class that I'm teaching this semester. So the class is about 30 students, Muslims and non-Muslims, undergraduate students at Rice University. So I want to share with you what I'm sharing with my students. So what I'm going to do is briefly go over the syllabus. So I want to talk about some of the stuff that we are going over in the class. And, this is all in the context of Islamophobia in Texas. So for those that aren't familiar really with Texas, it's kind of been a rough go lately in terms of Islamophobia with the whole election campaign and so on and so forth. So the class, Muslims in American Society, has a couple of aims. My first aim is one, to inform the students about this broad topic, Muslims in America, or Islam in America. So a lot of students are unfamiliar with a basic history of Islam in the United States. There's an assumption that Muslims and Islam started in the United States on 9/11, but if we actually consider the historical accounts, we will recognize that Islam has had a presence on North American soil, modern-day United States, since the United States even existed. The first Muslim Americans were, in fact, African slaves. And every single ethnicity, every single sect of Islam is represented in the United States. I often tell my students that there is no the most diverse Muslim community population in the world exists in the United States. So this is a point that is often forgotten by a lot of people. So one of the aims is to provide a general overview of Islam in America. The second point, my second aim, is to try to get rid of this binary. So a binary is like this, right? On one side, you have this term Muslim, and then on the other side, you have this term American. And a huge chunk of the American public don't think that these terms can come together. They don't think that these terms are compatible, right? Like you can't be Muslim at the same time or something like this. So my objective in the class is to bring these two terms together and to teach students that we do not necessarily have to play around with the binary, that we can synthesize these two terms and we can look at the concepts of Muslims and the concepts of Muslims and American not as mutually exclusive, as terms that can be in harmony with each other. And then the third objective of the course is to define and recognize Islamophobia, and also to find ways of countering Islamophobia. So teaching students how to recognize it and how to see it and how to pick it apart, but then also creating active students that can engage with this phenomena of Islamophobia in a way that is productive. Right? So those are the three aims: to provide a history of Islam in America, to synthesize the terms Muslim and America, and to get rid of the binary, and to fight Islamophobia. So the first week, which we have just concluded, starts off with a discussion of American identity. What does it mean to be American? This is a question that has plagued the country for years and years. What makes us a nation? What makes the American people a body? And throughout history, you have different interpretations of what it means to be an American. So what I want to do briefly is to provide you with three models of American identity that will help you understand what's happening in terms of the Muslim experience in modern day United States. So the first way of looking at American identity is through this idea of a primordial nation. So when I say primordial nation, I'm going back to the time of the first settlers, the first English settlers who were Puritans that came to modern day Massachusetts, largely Plymouth. So these were a group of Christian zealots, arguably, that were kicked out of England because they weren't conforming to the Church of England. So these were people that were very passionate about Christianity, and they wanted to create, in short, a Christian society, right? So you hear oftentimes this idea of America being a Christian nation. The reason why that narrative comes about is because of the Puritans and because of the early American settlers. The second identity is the pluralist identity. So the pluralist identity, this is ways of looking at what it means to be American, came about through the Revolutionary War. So we have a lot of primary documents in which George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin and John Adams are speaking highly of Muslims, to the extent where they're saying Muslims from around the world, and any oppressed group for that matter, are welcomed in the United States. So Thomas Jefferson owned a Quran. Plenty of documents out there saying that he welcomed Muslims. Back then, they used to call Muslims all sorts of different names, Mohammedans and Muslimans and so on and so forth. So Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, Ben Franklin said that that the Americans in Philadelphia should build a house of worship, not a church, a house of worship, that even if the Mufti of Constantinople, modern day Istanbul, if he wanted to come to Philadelphia and preach Islam, he would be allowed to do so. So the pluralist vision that's coming out of the American Revolution is emphasizing religious freedom. And it's representing this idea that American identity is not rooted in being Christian, it's rooted in being a citizen. So if you look at the U.S. Constitution, there is no religious obligation or anything. There's no religious clause saying you have to be a Christian to be an American. Like, the United States is not officially a Christian country. There might be a lot of Christians here, but it's not officially a Christian country. So the primordial identity was a Christian identity, a Christian nation. The pluralist identity was a type of identity founded on religious freedom. Now, the third identity we can refer to as the predator identity. And as you can imagine, the term predator is aggressive and it's nasty, and it's also coming out of the primordial identity, this idea of being a Christian nation, of being exclusive and being strict. So the predator identity, we see this coming about through things like the genocide of the Native Americans, the recent invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, this idea that if you're not with us, you're against us, and we're willing to roll over you through military means and military might because you don't agree with us. Right? So it's obviously in contradiction to the pluralist identity, which is saying that anyone can become an American. It doesn't matter if you're Muslim, agnostic, Jew, Christian, Catholic, whatever. The predator identity is saying not only do we not want these particular groups, in this context Muslims, but we're actually willing to be aggressive towards Muslims to make sure that they don't settle in the United States. So the predator arguably is someone like Donald Trump. Donald Trump is calling for a ban on Muslims, has suggested that Muslims carry ID cards. He's disrespected Muslims and he's disrespected everyone. And he's talking about wiping, Islamic radicals off the face of the earth. So kind of this zero tolerance, no nonsense policy. So these three models, the primordial, the pluralist, and the predator, like these three categories, we can call them, are useful in understanding what's happening to Muslim Americans today, right? Obviously, the predator identity, people like Donald Trump. The pluralist identity is an example like Congressman Keith Ellison, who is a Muslim serving on Capitol Hill. You have patriotic Americans. You have Americans engaging with Muslims on social media. this idea that anyone can become an American, and then the primordial, you still see this strong Christian presence in the country. So that's how we start the course. The next few weeks, we cover the basics of Islam, because a lot of the students aren't familiar with it, so we dedicate 3 classes to that, and then we get into Islamophobia, which is a topic that I've written a lot about. So we start by defining what Islamophobia is, or what an Islamophobe is, and it obviously starts with this idea that Islam is a monolith, when in reality Islam is a massive and diverse global body of human beings that has multiple streams, multiple interpretations, multiple beliefs. We also counter this idea that Islam is somehow inferior or barbaric or primitive, which it obviously is not. If we go back to various points in history, Muslim civilization has been the beacon, and it has been the light of human progress throughout history. So obviously Islam is not inferior. And then there are a few other points with Islamophobia. I don't want to get too much into it because there's a lot to get into. But we also deconstruct the Islamophobia industry. So all these websites that you see, all these social media accounts, all these blogs that spread hate and misinformation of Islam, in order to counter Islamophobia, we have to understand how it operates and where it's coming from. So we tackle the Islamophobia industry. Nathan Lean, who wrote the Islamophobia industry book, he comes and talks to my class. So we really get to the heart of, where are these messages coming from? How are they linked to the U.S. wars abroad? How are they linked to politicians? How does Fox News and CNN play a role in exacerbating Islamophobia? So we spend a few weeks on Islamophobia. We talk about this idea of Muslims living in a virtual internment camp. By that we mean, it's like they're placed in a box and there's surveillance and there's wiretapping and there's racial profiling, and FBI agents are going inside mosques and just being generally dodgy. So we attack that issue. So starting in week 5, what I've done in the syllabus is I start dedicating each week to different types of Muslim groups in the United States, just as a unit of analysis. So week 5, we pick up on the first Muslim Americans, which are Black Muslims, African American Muslims. So we talk a bit about the Nation of Islam. We talk a whole week on W.D. Muhammad and the kind of branching away from the Nation of Islam. I have Imam Wazir Ali. He is the imam at a masjid in Houston. He's coming in class, great speaker. He's coming to speak to the students. So we have that. And then we have a whole week dedicated to my man Malcolm X, one of the greatest Americans in history. A story about humanity. If you go back to some of Malcolm X's earlier teachings, you might read it and you might scratch your head and say, man, what was this guy on? And then, as many of you know, he goes to Mecca. He sees the diversity of Islam. The light bulb goes off in his head and realizes that Islam is not meant to be exclusive and narrow and intolerant. Unfortunately, he ended up being killed probably because of those beliefs. But we dedicate a whole class to my man Malcolm X. Week 6, we start getting into Arabs and South Asians. There's not enough weeks in this semester to dedicate a week to both, but we deal with the historic evolution of Arab Muslim identity. So throughout history, if we look at this issue from a legal perspective, like Arabs have been classified by the U.S. government as like white, as Arab, as Muslim. So all of these different categories throughout different history, it was really problematized Arab Muslim identity. Most Arabs in the United States, I'm not sure if you know this, are actually Christian, right? So Arab Christians get conflated with Arab Muslims, and then obviously whenever we start talking about Arabs, we get into this conflation that somehow what's happening in the Middle East is relevant to the lives of Arab Muslims in the United States. And it might be in some circumstances, but people watch Fox News and they see what's going on in Saudi Arabia or in different parts of the Middle East, and they may not like what they see, and then they may go to work and they may have a colleague who is Saudi, and then this person starts thinking, they start connecting the dots, and they start saying, okay, this person's Saudi, this is happening there must be a connection, and oftentimes there's no connection. So we also talk about this issue of flying while brown. So this largely has to do with South Asian Muslims, racial profiling at airports. So what's happened since 9/11 is people are being, largely brown people, are being profiled based on the physical characteristics of the hijackers of 9/11. Right, so it's this idea, it's blatant racism, really. I mean, racial profiling is racism, and that's why I've argued Islamophobia is racism. But you walk through an airport, if you have a certain look, a certain skin color, certain physical features, and certain clothing, you automatically get kind of lumped into this massive category of Muslim. And it impacts the senses of belonging and the overall experiences of Arabs and South Asians. So week 7, we tackle things like Sharia and Jihad. Obviously, these are two concepts in the United States which are always in the media, totally butchered, totally misunderstood. Newt Gingrich comes out a few weeks ago saying, Sharia is like a mortal threat to the United States, even though the American legal system and the courts in this country have recognized Sharia for quite some time. I mean, Newt Gingrich has no idea what he's talking about with Sharia. Absolutely no idea. He thinks it's a static legal code that is interpreted the same way by all Muslims around the world, when in fact there are different schools of Islamic jurisprudence which need to be taken into consideration. But this term Sharia just captures everything, and out of this comes the Muslim boogeyman, which is not correct. And the same goes for jihad. We have to consider all the different interpretations of jihad as well. We have the Muslim Marine, Rashed. He was the one that became an internet sensation after Donald Trump started going on about Muslim ID cards. Rashed is actually a Marine. He served. He was on active duty. He's a Muslim. And he tweeted to Donald Trump his ID card. He became an internet sensation. He's going to be joining us as well. So week 9, we dedicate a whole week to the experiences of Muslim women. So this is obviously a big subject, a topical subject that is covered a lot in the media, especially in light of this France burkini ban. We have the real pleasure of having Dalia Mogahed speak to us via Skype in mid-October. She is a prominent superstar among the Muslim American community, particularly among women, but she's also a superstar around the world. And I don't know specifically what she's going to be talking about, but I told her that she can basically talk about whatever she wants, because I'm sure it's going to be awesome. We also get into this idea of the Muslim woman activist. So this idea of Muslim women engaging with their own agency and taking control of the narrative, having Muslim women actually speak for themselves rather than listening to Sean Hannity talk about the hijab, which he doesn't wear. Why not have Muslim women actually talk about the things that pertain to them? So we're going to talk a little bit about like Linda Sarsour, who is a Palestinian American from Brooklyn. I'm sure you're familiar with her. We're going to talk about her because she kind of shatters this stereotype of like the passive Muslim woman who like has no voice and all that nonsense. And then we also get into the issue of why American women are converting to Islam. And this has a lot to do with issues pertaining to shame and honor, issues pertaining to modesty. A lot of this has to do with covering and sexuality, so we get into that. Week 10 of this class, we get into Hispanic Americans. Hispanic Americans or Latino Americans, two different terms which must be treated independently. Nonetheless, I've named the week Hispanic Americans. This is one of the fastest growing subgroups of the larger Muslim population in the United States. Tons of Latinos, Hispanics are converting from Catholicism to Islam. So we have to figure out, why is this happening? What is going on in the Catholic Church that is leading people to Islam, right? So this is an important subject because there is this assumption that the reason why the Muslim population worldwide is rising is because of forced conversions. But obviously that is not necessarily the case. So we talk about why Latinos and Hispanics are converting to Islam. We watch this documentary, which I highly recommend to you. You can find it online. It's called New Muslim Cool, and it's about a former Puerto Rican gang member that got involved in drugs and violence in an inner city, and he ends up coming to Islam, ends up marrying a Muslim woman, and the documentary explores his life and what it's like for him to be a convert and a hip-hop artist, which he is. In October, we have someone from Islam in Spanish of Houston coming to our class. So this is a new organization that is trying its best to spread the message of Islam among Latinos and Spanish-speaking people. So go to their website. It's called Islam in Spanish. I just saw a comment. Someone asked me what the documentary is called. It's called New Muslim Cool. And yes, you can come. If you're in Houston, anyone can come to my class. That's no problem. My email's online. If you're in town, message me and you can come. All right, so week 11, heading towards the end of the semester, we start talking about Mysters. I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with this term Myster, but it's like a Muslim hipster, so focusing largely on younger Western culture, dealing with issues of fashion and exposure. We deal with this issue of punk rock Islam. I don't know if you're familiar with Michael Muhammad Knight and some of the books and documentaries that he's made of Muslims that are actually punk rockers. Put into Google the term taqwa core, and you can read more about that. And then we also have to deal with this this subject that came up in light of the Orlando massacre, this intersection between Islam and LGBT Muslims. Like, there are gay Muslims out there. Historically, Islam has not really positioned this issue of homosexuality in a way that is conducive to a gay Muslim or a transgender Muslim living a decent life. So this is a topic that, this is kind of the cutting edge stuff. I've labeled this week the periphery, this idea of Muslims kind of on the edge of a community that are not like everyone else, but unique and important nonetheless. Week 12, we talk about what it's like to be a Muslim on campus. So we will invite the MSA at Rice to come and give a presentation. We talk a bit about that. And then we just talk about stories of Muslim students and how they interact with other students. We talk about, are universities doing enough to meet the needs of Muslims in terms of prayer, in terms of halal, and so on and so forth. Week 13, we get into one of my favorite topics, which is religious pluralism, and we're going to be talking about largely Prophet Muhammad's vision for the Ummah and an Islamic State as being a place that really does mirror what the founding fathers of the United States did a long time after Muhammad was around, but basically creating a society based on citizenship, based on human rights, based on this idea that anyone can become a member of this society so long as they play by the rules. So we talk about that. Week 14, we get into this topic of anti-racism. So how are Muslims combating Islamophobia? How are Muslims working with Black Lives Matter? So looking at the intersection there, looking at the experiences of Black Muslims within Black Lives Matter and how that relates to wider societal issues that are going on. And then we get into a Thanksgiving recess, and then my last week I keep it open. So that's usually just an opportunity to fill in the holes of some of the stuff that we missed or some of the stuff that students might want to cover. So I also have every one of the students writing a blog. I set up a blog called Muslims America, muslimsamerica.wordpress.com. So each part of their assignment, part of their grade for the class is to pick a subject that they're interested in writing about on Muslims and Islam, and they submit it to the blog. It's a really good blog. Rice students are really, really bright. So there we go. That is my class, Muslims in American Society. It'll be taught here at Rice University in the fall. I'll be teaching it again in the spring, and I will most definitely be teaching it next fall and next spring. So Muslims in American Society. You can find the syllabus maybe online too, and if you're really interested in it, I might send it to you if you contact me via email. So for all of you who are watching, thank you very much for joining me today. It's always a pleasure to interact with all of you via social media. If you're ever in Houston, give me a shout. And also, if you have additional ideas or readings to add to the syllabus, drop me a message either on social media or my website, which has a contact page. So, peace, my friends. Thank you all very much for your support, and thanks for joining. I hope that was enlightening, and I shall catch you soon. God bless.